So, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman just dropped a bombshell on India's GST system. We're talking a massive shakeup. Now, on the surface, some of your everyday items are about to get cheaper, but other things, well, they're getting hit with some serious tax hikes. So what's the real story here? We're going to break down the official version and maybe, just maybe, the one they don't want you to hear.
But that brings us to the real question, the one at the heart of this entire explainer. Why now? Why these huge changes at this exact moment and not before? Is this really just about putting a little more cash in your pocket? Or could these tax cuts be a very clever distraction from something much, much bigger?
All right, so first things first, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What exactly has changed? And more importantly, how is it going to affect the price of the stuff you buy every single day?
Okay, just a super quick refresher for anyone who needs it. GST, the Goods and Services Tax, is basically India's big unified tax system. It sorts pretty much everything you can buy into different categories, or slabs, to decide how much tax you pay. And it's those slabs that are getting a complete makeover. So they've basically taken the old system and boiled it down into three main slabs, and it's a tale of two extremes. On one hand, you've got some major tax cuts. Your shampoo, for example, is dropping from 18% all the way down to 5%. And TVs? They're going from a pretty hefty 28% down to a much more reasonable 18%. But, on the other hand, what they call sin goods, like cigarettes and luxury cars, they're getting bumped up to a brand new 40% slab. The strategy seems pretty clear, right? Make the essentials cheaper, but make the indulgences way more expensive. So that brings us to the timing of it all. The changes themselves are straightforward enough, but the why now part, that's where this story really gets fascinating. Let's start with the official reason the government is giving for this sudden move.
And here it is, the trigger. According to our source, back in August, U.S. President Trump slapped a massive 50% tariff on some key Indian exports. We're talking about huge industries like textiles and jewelry getting hit, and getting hit hard. And that one move put a ton of pressure on the Indian economy. You know, the timing of that was especially painful because before the tariffs, the Indian economy was, well, our source says it was in beast mode. In just the first quarter, our GDP had grown by an incredible 7.8%. I mean, that number put us among the fastest growing economies in the entire world. Things are looking really good. But then, boom, that whole positive story just hit a brick wall. Projections showed those tariffs could slash our GDP by an estimated 1.5%. That might not sound like a lot, but it would have wiped out a huge chunk of all that progress we'd made. Suddenly, that amazing growth was in jeopardy, and the government had to figure out a way to act, and act fast. So what's the game plan? Well, it's a pretty classic economic move. If you can't sell as much stuff to other countries because of tariffs, you've got to get people to buy more stuff at home. By cutting the GST on everyday items, the government is basically trying to encourage us all to spend more, to fill that gap left by the drop in exports. But hold on a second. Cutting taxes means the government gets less money, right? So how on earth are they paying for this? Well, this is where you see the other side of the coin. And it shows that this whole thing is a really delicate balancing act. Right around the same time all these tax cuts were being announced, something else was going on. You might have noticed it. Telecom giants like Airtel and Jio started hiking their prices a lot. So while your shampoo was getting cheaper, your mobile data was suddenly getting a whole lot more expensive. And we're not talking about a small change. The industry's new target for what they call average revenue per user, or ARPU, basically how much money they make from each of us, shot up to 300 rupees. Now, for perspective, that's a massive jump. It's a clear signal that these companies are planning to make way more money from every single customer. And that, right there, is how it all connects back. So, higher prices for data and calls mean more GST gets collected from all those telecom services. And that extra cash coming in neatly helps to cover the money the government is losing from cutting taxes on goods. It's a win-win, at least from their perspective. We feel some relief on our daily shopping, and the government's budget stays balanced. So, case closed, right? A smart, neat response to U.S. tariffs, perfectly balanced by telecom price hikes. Or, as we asked at the very beginning, is there another layer to this? Is there more to the story? And this is where we get into the alternative explanation, what our source is calling the China diversion theory. The whole idea here is that these very public, very popular tax cuts could just be a convenient way to distract us all from another, much
bigger economic threat looming on the horizon.
And that threat, it's coming straight from China. Right now, India's own domestic mining sector is in serious trouble. And the source points the finger at one main cause: a flood of super cheap rare earth exports from China that are just crushing local producers and sending the industry into a steep decline.
And this isn't some small problem. We're talking about a trade deficit that has ballooned to a staggering $99 billion. That is a massive economic vulnerability, and it's exactly the kind of bad news headline that any government would want to keep out of the spotlight.
So let's put the pieces of this theory together. First, the GST cuts create good news and happy headlines. That positive buzz helps distract everybody from the growing fears about job losses in our struggling mining sector. But here's the real kicker, the ironic twist. Making goods cheaper in India could actually end up encouraging even more cheap Chinese imports, which would make our dependency on China even worse in the long run.
All right, so we've looked at the official story about the U.S. tariffs, and we've dived into the diversion theory about China. So where does that leave us? What's the final verdict? Was this a brilliant economic masterstroke or a clever piece of political misdirection? Well, according to the source we're looking at, the verdict is in, and it's overwhelmingly positive. The finance minister gets a score of 8 out of 10 for this move. They're even comparing its potential impact to the big, successful corporate tax cuts back in 2019. It's being framed as a really solid policy to kickstart growth.
So let's boil it all down. What does this actually mean for your wallet? It's pretty simple, really. You should have a bit more money to spend thanks to lower prices on daily essentials. But at the same time, get ready to pay a lot more for luxury goods, cigarettes, and all those other sin items. And that brings us right back to where we started. Now that you've heard both sides of the story, the pressure from the US, the balancing act with telecom prices, and the deep concerns about China, what's your take? Was this whole thing a genuine relief measure for the middle class? Or was it a clever ruse to keep our eyes off of even bigger economic problems? As with most things, the real answer is probably somewhere in the middle.